Why do those whom we consider the strongest end up being the most broken? The pursuit of strength is a time-honored tradition. The former practice of strength training goes back nearly 5,500 years to Chinese, Persian, and Egyptian history, depicted in the murals of the tomb of Beni Hassan. But the chances are that strength training is as old as is the need for human survival. For most of human history, developing strength was a natural pursuit. It's an attribute regaled by societies around the world. It is revealed in our lore, threaded into our fables, and mythologized even in modern times. The truth about strength is that there will never be a weak hero. Today, we have formal approaches to strength, scientifically backed protocols, and international sports that represent this attribute. The term 1 rep max is now a household term, and most people have been indoctrinated by the rep set schedules of AC Prelipin. Even my mother knows what a 5x5 means. We encourage our kids to bench press, our elderly to deadlift, and yet something about attaining and maintaining strength for a lifetime seems elusive to the masses. With as much information as there is on the topic of strength, there is a proliferation of weakness. Today, we're going to cover the biggest misconceptions about strength training, the methods that have changed how I see traditional efforts, and things that you can implement in your own strength training that might save you from crippling yourself. Welcome to the Unfvckd podcast. My name is Michael Blevins. I've been training some of the world's most elite performers for over 15 years. From iconic actors and athletes to soldiers and CEOs. I'm an entrepreneur, an athlete, and an obsessive when it comes to human behavior.
Man looks in the abyss. There's nothing staring back at him. At that moment, man finds his character. And that is what keeps him out of the abyss. I think I understand.
When it comes to fitness, strength is one of the most challenging concepts to communicate effectively. It's often assumed that everyone understands what strength is, but even technical or scientific definitions present a host of problems. I find it curious that many people ask, how strong is strong enough? Yet very few people stop to consider, what is strength? This disregard for a clear definition might explain why so many struggle to achieve meaningful outcomes in their strength training. For instance, those who rely on traditional methods with a barbell often end up with significant injuries. Ironically, the very thing they might be trying to prevent by getting stronger in the first place. Our everyday use of the word strength further muddies the waters. What do we really mean when we describe an athlete as strong? It took me over a decade of training before I even began to question how strength is defined. Like many, I was fixated on hitting a specific number in a particular movement, a metric to validate my ability. But I would often find myself hurt from attempting to increase my strength through the barbell, lying on the floor for days at a time, being unable to move without searing pain. I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. I certainly didn't feel strong. If you ask someone today to define strength, they might rattle off synonyms like resilience, resistance, or force production. But when pressed, most fall back on, you know it when you see it. And that's exactly what we do. We look for it. For the past 50 years, the average strategy for learning strength has been to ask the big guy at the gym, often mistaking size for strength. Before diving in to the issues with modern or traditional strength models, we need to explore its history to understand where these ideas originated from. Strength may be one of the oldest human attributes. It's valued across every culture throughout history. When we describe somebody as strong, we infer a range of qualities beyond just the physical. High pain tolerance, integrity, resilience, all character traits that are vital to successful societies. Heroes, after all, are never celebrated for their weaknesses. In ancient times, before the advent of machines, the benefits of strong individuals were evident in labor and warfare. Even today, strong people often find themselves reluctantly recruited to move a friend's furniture. The training of strength dates back nearly 5,500 years to the ancient Egyptians, as seen in carvings in the tomb of Beni Hassan. Alongside 400 depictions of wrestling, there are images of men and women lifting heavy bags of sand or weighted clubs in movements resembling the modern version of the clean and jerk. Shortly after, Chinese art depicting similar sandbag lifting, and of course the ancient Greeks revered strength as much as they did intellectual contemplation. Gymnasiums, which literally means naked wrestling, could be seen as temples of physical worship in Greek culture. They were often next to schools of thought, and many Greek philosophers were wrestlers, like Plato, which was a nickname meaning broad-shouldered. For most of history, physical development went hand in hand with self-discovery and the psychological correlates to strength. From the stories that get passed down of our greatest ancestors to the lore of our people and the qualities and traits of our myths and legends, strength will be a thread that goes throughout all of them. Since the first depictions to up until about the mid 20th century, nothing really changes with our concept of strength. It's developed cross cultures, individually, and as coming of ages for young men and women. So what exactly is strength? Is it a physiological attribute or an energy system or a byproduct of maximal contraction rate? Modern definitions often describe it as the ability of a muscle or a group of muscles to overcome resistance or the capacity to generate maximal force regardless of speed. These definitions suggest a purely muscular action focused on moving weight or oneself. Naturally, when learning about strength, our first instinct is to lift heavy weights with maximum effort. After all, when you look around a gym, the biggest, seemingly strongest individuals are usually pushing or pulling the heaviest loads. Often what we observe is not strength, but a display of power. A heavy barbell moving represents a force multiplied by distance divided by time, which is the equation for power. This is where the lines blur between strength and power. Power is frequently described as strength or force applied through speed or velocity, and this is noted because the variant of time. But there's no clear benchmark for what fast or slow means. It's another case of you know it when you see it. Strength defined as maximum force applied will still have a component of time because we exist in a three-dimensional world. Most definitions of strength imply movement, such as the term overcoming from point A to point B, leading us to assume that strength is just a slower version of power. This confusion often leads people to train the wrong attribute. The focus shifts to completing the movement itself, where the execution becomes the metric and the metric becomes the measure of success. I fell prey to this, not just once, but for years through many different attempts at trying to get strong. I would often try to get strong by just simply doing something more. If I couldn't do more weight, I would do more reps. I would hit these barriers that I felt were impossible to get past. And to make up for that, I would just continue to lift repetitions. I blamed my physiology, my genetics, and even my brain, but I had yet to define what it was I was trying to do. The one thing that was hardest for me to overcome was not a heavy barbell, but a concept of what it means to be strong. After years of grappling with these unclear definitions, I began to challenge even the scientific ones, the formula for power, force equals mass multiplied by acceleration. This helped me uncover what I believe is the true essence of strength. In common language, I define strength as the behavior of holding maximally. I base this on recognizing common prescriptions for identifying weaknesses in lifts, which was an inability to hold a position. You almost never lose a squat because your legs fail. It's failure to hold the spine in a correct manner so the legs can drive. This also crossed over into thinking about strength as a universal term. Consider a wall. You wouldn't call it powerful because it doesn't move. A wall is built to hold, and a great wall is a strong one. Strength relates to power because in most cases you must hold your joints and stabilize them in order to push, pull, or jump. In other words, to move. This perspective aligns with the equations. Power as force equals mass times acceleration is evident in explosive feats like the snatch and clean and jerk or the hammer throw, which are most often associated with athleticism, characterized by fluid, rhythmic, and explosive movement. Strength, on the other hand, I started to describe as force is equal to mass times deceleration. It involves isometric and eccentric movements, which are fundamentally about the control over an implement or oneself. The ability to decelerate enables the equal and opposite force of acceleration. I imagine strength and power as part of the same unit. I liken it to a spherical shape, and I conceptualize strength as the axis point for a movement of that spherical shape. The stronger the axis, the more potential power. But if the axis is weak, power becomes unstable and unreliable, which is what I always found myself to be. I was overpowered and underdeveloped in the realm of strength. I can see this reflected in my own limitations with lifting. To give you a really clear example, I have cleaned my front squat max more times than I have front squatted. This happens because a full clean, if timed properly, can skip the deceleration and use the bar oscillation to assist in acceleration. The front squat, however, comes from a static start and requires deceleration before the turnaround. And I have more power than strength, so it was always possible to clean almost more than I could squat. So if a clean is off by even a margin, I miss it. Many lifters have the opposite problem, which is that they can squat a house, but they can't get under the bar. They lack power or they lack speed. While most powerful people are strong, or at least strong enough, not all strong people are powerful. Those deemed too strong often exhibit a rigidity that hinders dynamic movement. You see this in individuals who can tolerate immense loads, deadlifting 1,000 pounds, for example, but struggle to put half of that overhead. This is because these are distinct behaviors and they should be trained separately. This realization shifted my training approach. I understood that back squatting more weight requires strength, but doesn't necessarily build it. The expression of squatting is power dependent on strength, specifically the ability to hold your spine in a position to bear increasing loads. Once I recognized strength as the capacity to hold, I focused on decelerating loads and contracting isometrically to a maximal degree. This often looks like tempo and pause work, which is common in strength programs, but many don't understand why these techniques are included. Their focus remains on a number on a bar. Simply adding more weight can put a target on your back, quite literally, because the goal overshadows the real desired adaptation. You can influence strength through power only to a certain extent. Beyond that, you must train it specifically. Perhaps the most profound insight is this: to get strong, you must recognize and address what is weak. So, where do we go from here? There's a clear discrepancy between our concept of strength and how we pursue it. To unravel this, we have to examine how modern methods have shaped the fitness industry. Beyond the Greeks, strength training didn't evolve much for thousands of years until the Soviets turned it into an actual science. Their methodology drew inspiration from the story of Milo from Croton, the ancient Greek strongman who carried a calf daily, adapting to its growth until it became a full-grown bull. This is what led to the concept we now know as progressive overload. However, the Soviets, like others, encountered limits when perpetually adding weight to movements. The body does not progress in a linear and consistent algorithmic way. This led to the modern system of strength training, in which 99% of what we teach the average trainee is based. Linear periodized progressive overload evolved into the conjugated progressive overload. It is a methodology used to temporarily peak an individual, and it takes into account all the limitations of a linear progress. This peaking is not sustainable. Herein lies a systemic issue: applying sports science to the general public. We're not all trying to excel at the sport of weightlifting. An exercise that is a sport in and of itself demands something entirely differently than what a person seeking general fitness and health requires. The Soviet methodology was designed for specific sports with the goal of excelling on the world stage, often at the cost of the athlete's well-being, to showcase physical prowess against the West. Interestingly, even though our rep and set schedules stem from their systems, they were transparent about the effects of systematized strength progression for sport-specific adaptations. They highlighted the law of specificity, noting that an athlete's limitations are tied to the exact adaptations they seek. And this was counterbalanced by something known as the law of accommodation, which addresses how the body adapts to repeated stimuli over time. As a young athlete and coach, I skimmed over these warnings in their training manuals, eager to get to the actionable content. What are the set rep structure? What are the movements that I need to do? Because I was so focused on proving that I was a strong human, I missed the warning signs. Most of us are so driven to feel valued in society, to make a name for ourselves, and to project our best qualities that we overlook the deeper lessons that strength training offers. We also tend to ignore the consequences of becoming too strong. This makes the tale of Milo of Croton much more relevant than we might know. His story inspired many young men to push their limits, but the fable's ending is often skipped. Milo, celebrated as one of history's strongest men and decorated as an athlete and soldier, fell victim to hubris. In an attempt to prove his dominance, he tried to split a tree with his bare hands, using wedges to hold it open. When the wedges fell out, he became trapped, and ultimately he was eaten by wolves. His story uncovers the importance of not only defining strength, but understanding that there is a logical endpoint to developing it. Only with a true definition can we learn how to develop the kind of strength that is useful to us personally. Only then will this question be answered: how strong is strong enough? My personal journey with strength over the past decade and a half has been a very different one. I was once very obsessed with a single movement, and I saw that single movement as a metric that if I moved it, people would view me differently, and that was the deadlift. And as much as I talk down about a deadlift that you might hear me say that it's not everything, at the time when I was younger, it really represented something that I strived to succeed at. And at a body weight of between 179 and 185, I was very much stuck at a 365-pound deadlift. And this was for years, 2 years, I think there went by, where if I put 366 on a bar, I couldn't pull it. It was glued to the ground. But I could, in fact, pull 20 reps at 315 pounds, which makes no logical sense. So in this case, I would blame my positioning, my brain, my psychology, my genetics. Everything was the fault of why I couldn't achieve this goal. And funny enough, the goal was completely arbitrary. For some reason, I saw 405 pounds as success and my 365 as not success. And although there's psychological kind of limitations that are baked into that are well known, the real revelation that this led to was finding a coach. So I was working down in South Africa. I was in Joburg for a couple months, and in order to use a gym down there for the production that we were on, I met a guy named Joshua Capazario. And at the time, he was a multi-time junior world powerlifting champ. He was incredibly strong, and he trained at Wits University. And so if you don't know, Wits University is like where some of the most data on strength training comes out of. And he was part of a very small group of people that was allowed to train there and develop. I just wanted to get coached by him because I walked in the gym and he was pulling a 320 kilo rack pull for a set of 8. And it was so absolutely impressive that I knew that maybe this is the person that could teach me how to bridge this gap. Why I didn't feel like I was strong. And the reason I didn't feel strong was because I didn't ever achieve this number, this arbitrary number that I had in my head. And he agreed. So we started our coaching. I was going to train with him twice a day. And the first lesson I said, I want a big deadlift. I want to be able to pull, more than 400 pounds. And he said, that's super easy. So he watched me lift for maybe a half hour. He took different angles. He walked around. He saw me from the back, and he asked me a couple questions about, how I had prepared for this. And it wasn't a max lift that he was watching, but it was heavy enough that he could see kind of the limitations of the lift. And the funny thing about this is he came to the conclusion very, very quickly that I should not, in fact, deadlift. And his reasoning for this was that it wasn't my lift, that I was not built for this, that my tissue was not in accordance with what it took to pull a heavy deadlift. And I was kind of thrown off by this because, we're all supposed to be strong, where this is something that we're supposed to adapt to. But I heard him out because of how he described what I was doing. And what he said was that he described me as a mover, somebody that moves well and is very aware of the patterns that I have, and that strength can come by that way, that I can develop strength by actually moving, and I will play to my strength, which is, kind of a cross term, but here it kind of makes sense, by not directly trying to force this like grinding adaptation. I will get the adaptation by moving quickly and dynamically. And so I took his word for it. I did not pull a deadlift for over 2 years, and I simply worked on clean and jerking and snatch. Now, if you know anything about these, it's no secret that pulling off of the ground under speed and dynamic load is essentially how the Russians tricked the system, and that's where we get the dynamic system that's still used in the conjugate system today, which is to overload with speed to get a higher contraction rate of force. So I just focused on the Olympic weight lifts, and I did that, consistently. I became obsessed with them, but I was still limited. Like I could, as I described earlier, I could clean my front squat max, which is a very unusual thing. And that really baffled me because I didn't understand what was actually weak. I had an inability specifically to hold tension in my thoracic. I have a hypermobile thoracic and very good overhead position. And that hypermobility meant that I had a lack of contraction rate. So in a front squat, in the bottom, as you start to shift angles, the angle of the hip makes the fulcrum at the top of the shoulder at the highest degree, and that would fold the thoracic. So unless I hit a perfect line, I couldn't really stand it up. And this is really an interesting factor about strength, about how specific it is. In focusing on these lifts for multiple years in a row and training them every single day, I really had to start paying attention to what was weak, and that really became evident. Now, years later, it was exactly, I think, 2.5 years later, I was at a barbell competition in Detroit, and it was the first time that they required a maximum deadlift. And to be fair, I hadn't deadlifted for 2 years. And I was frightened by this. I was absolutely mortified that I was about to humiliate myself. Now, I could snatch almost 300 pounds and I could clean and jerk well into the 300s. But for some reason, I still thought that I couldn't pull 365 pounds off the ground. And what's interesting is that I ended up blindly pulling. In fact, it's kind of an interesting concept for the competition. It's a 5 minute to max as opposed to attempts. So you do all 5 lifts, bench, squat, deadlift, clean and jerk, and snatch. And you basically, when it's your time to go, you have 5 minutes to hit your best lift, which is kind of a cool concept, except I had no idea where to start. And in warming up, I didn't even look at the plates. I just lifted till I felt something heavy, and then I went out. And at the time I was working on Batman versus Superman. We were filming in Detroit. So the person who was helping me was actually Henry Cavill. And so I had essentially Superman as my quote unquote spotter, which felt ridiculous. And also I have this perpetual fear of deadlifting because I still consider myself weak. So by the time people recognized him, we have essentially every camera and every person is watching me lift in this really ridiculous, scenario where I'm trying to prove that I'm strong, and I haven't trained this movement for a really long time. So long story short, I just had him start loading up in the bar, and I ended up pulling 11 times in that 5 minutes because I started apparently way too low, and I just had him kept adding 20 pounds each time. I ended at 475, and it was an easy 475, but I ran out of time. And that was the first time that I recognized that my concept of strength is so absolutely incorrect, because I thought the law of specificity would kick in here and I would be bad at it because I hadn't practiced it. And this is really that started kind of the cascade of me trying to understand where lifting weights and this traditional model where we are told that, the way to get strong is through a barbell, that's where I really started to question it. Now, there's nothing wrong with training with a barbell. That's absolutely a good way to develop yourself. However, there are very obvious pitfalls along the way. And I think to give people a prescription for strength only through that methodology, it really masks the fact that we don't understand strength as a trait or a concept. And this is really what I'm getting to when I'm criticizing the traditional methodology. Isn't that it's wrong. It's not that powerlifting is wrong or that weightlifting isn't a way to get strong. It's absolutely one way. It, however, has a lot of misconceptions baked into it. And one of the biggest ones is the one that I fell into, which was thinking that the number on a bar or the achievement of an exercise or a arbitrary number would then identify myself as strong. If I fast forward through that progression, once I broke through some of these boundaries, which I credit the barbell for, allowing me to shift my state and really confront my preconceived limitations of myself, even if it was an arbitrary number, I would end up lifting much more weight than that. And that is only due to the fact that the barbell provides a very honest feedback about what is wrong and how to fix it, essentially. What I didn't understand is that by achieving these high numbers, that although you gain the confidence of this, much like Milo gained the confidence of being the world's strongest man, you also don't understand that strength is a behavior. It's not an asset that you own. You don't achieve it. It's something that you exhibit. And by exhibiting strength in a very specific and narrow degree, you have to limit it in another degree. And I think this is obvious when you see, I'll use this as an example just because I was just talking about this earlier today. People mostly know, I think that like Matt Frazier, world's possibly fittest person who has ever lived, if we talk about general fitness, he's well known for being able to put 400 pounds overhead, row, a very low 6-minute 2K, run for hours on end. I think any general fitness metric that you measure him on, he's going to be at a world-class level or close to it, given his size. So nobody would consider him weak. But the story goes that he started practicing jiu-jitsu and he blew his ACL part into a couple different, pieces. Now, I'm not commenting on like what happened because I don't know. But what I do know about that specific scenario is something that would happen to many people that I know, which is develop a very high degree of confidence and high, I would say, competence in a very limited, narrow range. So although you can lift a ton of weight and resist a bunch of load in a very narrow margin, the second you go to rotational capacity, you're essentially untrained. And this is the problem that I discovered, probably just like him, through multiple different injuries, is that just because I can pull hundreds and hundreds of pounds off of the ground doesn't mean I'm not going to get injured. And this is the big misconception, I think, with strength. People attempt to get strong because they want to be more impervious to injury. They want to be more resilient. That is one of the long characteristics that we try to achieve. We want resilience in the face of adversity, so we practice it under a barbell. However, it's a false setup, and that's because we don't have good definitions for it. And that is just my experience with it. There's multiple different stories that I could go into with shifts that I've made learning on a barbell, which I credit to weightlifting and that sport. So the discussion on strength is just the beginning. Join me next time as I cover some of the more important realizations about strength and its implications to the traits and behaviors we wish to develop. I'm Michael Blevins. Till next time.